Hi there, I'm Andy and welcome to my channel. Today's episode is going to be about CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies. What they are the pros and cons, where we are with the development of CBDCs, and why quite a few people are concerned about their potential usage in the future. Because I think it's really important to be aware of what CBDCs are and not necessarily how they may be used in an ideal case scenario, but more importantly, what are the potential risks that come with them. As always, if you like those videos, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Also, if you would like to learn more about crypto, Web3, the direction we are heading, please do check out my course, Crypto Like a Pro. You can find the link in the description. So first of all, what is a CBDC? Well, it's a central bank digital currency. The name is pretty self-explanatory, but a lot of people often associate CBDCs with cryptocurrencies, especially cryptocurrencies such as stablecoins, which are pegged one-to-one to a dollar or another fiat currency. And that's largely because a lot of the talk about CBDCs or a lot of the research and progress in this area started happening roughly around the time when crypto started becoming really popular during the last crypto bull run, so around 2021, 2022. So, well, first of all, CBDC is, it's a digital currency issued by a central bank. So it is a type of digital money, but it's not a cryptocurrency and it's not decentralized. All cryptocurrencies are by the very design decentralized to at least some extent, and a lot of them are really heavily decentralized. CBDCs are issued by, central banks, so by its very nature, they are not decentralized. There is one central authority that's holding full access to not only this currency, but also more importantly, to the ledger in which all the transactions are being recorded. And that's potentially one of the biggest issues with CBDCs. In this video, I'll be just covering some main points about them. But if you would like to learn more, there are some really good articles. I'll put some links to those in the description. Like, for example, this one on Cointelegraph, which describes in decent amount of detail what CBDCs are. And as you can see, there are many different aspects to them. And there are actually different types of those currencies. So you can read up more about it. And to be honest, I think it's really important to do so because in some shape or form, and at least to some degree, CBDCs will come to most countries over the next, if not few years, certainly over the next decade or so. And I think it's really important to fully understand what they are and how they can impact us in the future. And here on Investopedia, you can also read another really good article, which goes into quite a bit of detail. And it covers, amongst other things, what is the main goal of CBDCs. And it all starts really well, right? So the idea is to provide businesses and customers with privacy, convenience, accessibility, financial security, and so on. The idea is also that financial transactions will be simpler. Basically, you get rid of the commercial bank, which is an intermediary between you and the central bank, and you can get money directly from the central bank, which would make transactions much quicker, simpler. Technically, you wouldn't need a bank account, right? You would just need an app, a mobile phone, something like that. And you could just get the funds directly from the central bank. Of course, straight away, it's clear that this will have major impact on the whole financial system, how it works, how it's constructed, where the money is made. So a lot of commercial banks could potentially go out of business because, people could just go around them. There would be no need for them, essentially. And there are certainly a lot of potential benefits to CBDCs. But like with everything, there are also some issues with CBDCs, and we'll be looking at those, in a minute. So where we actually are with CBDCs at the moment, when they are likely to be implemented? Well, they're being researched by over 80 countries, and those 80 countries are actually contributing more than 90% of the global domestic product. So they are pretty widely being concerned as a potential new means of payment. They're already being piloted by at least 14 countries, including, for example, Sweden. And they're already used by 5 countries. I believe it's actually in total 9 countries and various territories, which at the moment are mainly relatively small countries, most of them at least. But as you can see by those numbers, especially this first one here, well, they are quite certainly being seriously considered. And it's quite reasonable to expect that they will be quite widely implemented in the next 5 to 10 years. For example, the Bank of England has this website about CBDCs and about their research into digital currencies. And the idea is that I think they're planning to implement it by 2030 or something around that date, so within the next 7 years or so. And what's, I think, quite interesting here is this section: will a CBDC replace cash? And according to the Bank of England, people are using less cash to pay for things, but we know it's still important for many people. We will keep issuing cash in the UK as long as people want to use it. Which sounds well and good, but I think this sentence here could be understood in many different ways. And most importantly, it can be interpreted by the Bank of England or by the government in pretty much whatever way they want, right? Because although people may still want to use cash, at some point there may be an argument that, well, if people are using less and less cash to pay for things, which is certainly the trend now, especially after COVID, a lot of businesses are now completely cashless. We are used to paying for everything with debit card, and hardly ever, a lot of people, to be honest, myself including, hardly ever actually carry any cash with them. Well, the issue is that if the trend is that, less and less people are using cash, then there may be a very strong argument that, well, we'll get rid of banks, as in branches, which is already happening on a massive scale. Maybe get rid of ATMs, cash points, which is also gradually happening. And eventually we may get to the point that, well, people may still want to use cash, but it's becoming such a small niche that quite easily the government or the central bank can say, well, actually, hardly anyone wants to use cash anymore, or the trend is certainly heading in that direction. Well, let's get rid of it altogether and just have only CBDCs. And that would most certainly be an issue. And we'll look at that in a moment. But that's the kind of stuff that's really important to look at. It's how the governments, how the central banks are likely to implement it. And as long as there are alternatives to CBDCs, everything is well and good. But I think a lot of those statements are formulated in such a way that although they're supposed to suggest that cash will be still used, actually, they suggest that, well, it may be phased out because of the existing trend, if that makes sense. So what are the main pros of CBDCs? Well, first of all, using those digital currencies would make transactions cheaper and faster, which is certainly a huge benefit, especially when it comes to international transactions. All the issues with exchange rates, they would still exist, but at the moment, if you want to send currency or you want to send a payment from bank in one country to another bank in another country, well, the money doesn't usually go from bank A to bank B. It goes via intermediary banks, right? So you send your money from your bank and then it goes to another bank and then it goes to yet another bank and then eventually it reaches the final bank. Of course, this means quite high fees. It means quite slow transfers. It's perfectly normal for international transactions to take sometimes a couple of days and incur quite significant fees. CBDCs could quite easily solve that issue, so that's certainly a big plus. They also don't require a traditional bank account, which is something I mentioned earlier. You could just have your mobile phone and an app, and you would have access to money and financial services, which in some countries could massively help the local populations because a lot of people around the world are still unbanked. They don't have an access to a bank account, or it may not be feasible in the area where they live to actually go to a branch or have any sort of access. But quite often, they may have a mobile phone and internet access, or a computer and internet access. And this could potentially hugely benefit them in terms of what they can actually do financially. So clearly that's a huge benefit, similar to how people present cryptocurrencies, or a lot of cryptocurrencies, that, well, they could help banking the unbanked. Also, CBDCs would be available around the clock, just like crypto. So there's no such thing as a bank working hours or something like that. There is no issue with bank being closed or ATM running out of money or anything like that. You would have access to cash at any time of day and night, regardless where you are in the world, which, again, is certainly a big benefit. And finally, all the costs would be lower, not only for international transactions, as I mentioned earlier, but also for all the local transactions, which is great for businesses. It's great for, well, pretty much everyone involved, right? Because that means that there will be more money in the system. If you're paying for something, well, the price remains the same, but then the business owner is getting more money, which in turn means that they can pay more their employees, they can reinvest that money in their business, in the product, and so on. So, of course, that would have a lot of benefits. With all that being said, CBDCs have two main faults. First of all, it's programmable money. And second, there are some serious privacy concerns. So what do I mean by programmable money? Well, it means that it's not just normal money. It's not just a stack of cash or a number in your bank account. It's money that can be actually changed. It can behave differently for different people. So at the moment, although a lot of transactions, digital transactions we're conducting, are very much like the transactions that would be conducted using CBDCs, well, at the moment, all the money we're using is kind of dumb money, right? It's just money. It's just a figure on your bank statement. And yes, of course, there can be restrictions imposed on your bank account. I don't know, it can be frozen because of criminal activity or stuff like that. But first of all, it's not necessarily a very simple process. There are multiple parties involved. And also, it's still all relatively basic. You either have your access to your money or you don't. Certain transactions may be blocked, but it tends to be quite a blanket block, right? So for example, I don't know, all your online transactions may be blocked, or international transactions or something like that. But generally speaking, you cannot just block individual transactions very easily, or types of transactions, if that makes sense. What programmable money would allow is that, for example, if for whatever reason the government or the central bank would want to block your access to, let's say, plane tickets, well, they would just block all the transactions of this type. Or they could limit how much money you can use in a day, or by what time you have to spend your money, or otherwise it becomes worthless, and so on and so on. The money being programmable means that the government and the central bank operating with that government can completely change how the money behaves in different situations. And the issue here is that those two institutions then hold full power over literally all the money in that country. And that's very dangerous, I think. We've seen, especially over the last few years, that governments can, well, push a lot of their own agendas, not necessarily agendas which agree with a lot of people. And this way, they could quite easily manipulate a lot of our behaviors by simply blocking our access to certain services. If you don't agree with certain policy, okay, suddenly, for example, you can just buy basic groceries and that's it. It may all sound a bit science fiction and a bit dystopian at the moment, but it's certainly possible, and it's something that I think we should all be aware when talking about CBDCs, that there is this huge risk of how it could be utilized in the future. And that closely links to the privacy concern. Again, all the transactions would be recorded by central bank, like all the details of every single transactions, how you spend your money, when, what you're buying, all of that, which then gives that central bank a lot of control over your data. So generally speaking, I think it's always very dangerous when any organization, any party, any person has too much power, because things tend to go horribly wrong in such situation. And that certainly shifts a lot of power towards government and central bank, which I don't think it's a good thing. So here are a few examples of how this could be used by the government. So first of all, as I said, it gives the government a lot of surveillance power, right? They can see literally every single of your transactions. Of course, this is also possible now, but well, you can hold your accounts, or you can hold your money in multiple accounts, multiple banks. You can have crypto, you can have other assets, you can have cash. Sure, spending large amounts of cash is not very easy these days, but technically speaking, you could just have cash and pay for almost everything in cash if you really, really wanted to, at least in many countries. If CBDCs are the only method of payment, all of that would be gone. It would be really, really easy to pull full financial records of every individual because it will be all held in one place, in one ledger. Then there is a risk of freezing funds or imposing restrictions. Again, something I've just mentioned. And yes, this is of course possible right now as well. But as I said earlier, it's not really that easy to do. And also it is quite primitive in the way it works. The way it could work with CBDCs is much more fancy, much more intricate. It could be much more detailed and give much more control and essentially manipulate the financial system and every individual as a result. And then finally, there is a whole issue of things like social score, carbon credits, and so on. Social score is already a thing in China. And there are a lot of myths around it, but essentially every citizen in China not only has a credit rating score, which probably most of us are familiar with, but they also have something called social credit score. So every single action they do has some sort of implication on their score, right? So for example, if this was implemented on a mass scale, well, you get a parking ticket, well, that lowers your social score. A bit more extreme example, let's say that you are putting on social media some content which is against your local government or whatever else, that could again lower your score. And so on, so on. So suddenly that gives huge amount of potential control if you combine this with money. By the way it works in China, it's not quite the way I'm describing at the moment. You can read this article here, it's just one of the examples. But again, it all goes back to the whole thing with how CBDCs can be used in a good way and how most likely they will be sold to all of us as this next great thing where basically transactions are cheaper, easier, everyone has access to money, even people who currently may not have access to banking and so on. And that's all great. But then there is this whole huge side of, well, what you could potentially do with it, how much control it gives someone. And I'm sure that some people will think at this point, well, hey, is this not like cryptocurrencies that everyone is pushing them as this next amazing thing? Well, no, because there's one big difference here. Cryptocurrencies are decentralized. No one can fully control Bitcoin. No one can fully control Ethereum, or at least it's very, very difficult to do so. The whole idea is that cryptocurrencies are decentralized. There is no one cryptocurrency to rule them all. And there is no one server, no one person, no one organization that controls one particular cryptocurrency, let alone all of them. And as long as we have those choices, all is well and good. I have nothing against CBDCs if they're just one of the options, right? You have CBDC, you have cash, you have your normal bank account, you have cryptocurrency, and you can pay using whichever. That's absolutely fine. However, I'm slightly worried that we may reach a certain point, not next year, not in 5 years, but maybe in 10 years' time or so, where people will be really happy with how convenient CBDCs are. And hardly anyone will be using cash for anything anymore. Governments will phase out cash. And if then there are any restrictions, heavy restrictions imposed on cryptocurrencies, we may suddenly end up in a position where there are only CBDCs available. And that would be a very dangerous place to be in because of all the reasons I mentioned before. So I think the really important thing here and the main point of this video is to educate yourself about CBDCs, read up about them, find out what the central bank, the government in your country is planning to do regarding CBDCs. And if there are any opportunities to have your say, well, try to have your say in this case, because if it goes in the wrong direction, it can be really, really dangerous for all of us. And like I said earlier, I think the issue is that initially it will be actually really good, and it will be suddenly sold as something really good. And the potential issues will only come down the line, especially if people are not aware of them. So I hope you found this video interesting. If you have any comments or thoughts or questions regarding CBDCs, please put them in the comment section. And otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.